Presidente del Gobierno, Secretario General de la OTAN, presidentes del Gobierno, predecesores en la Secretaría General de la OTAN, Presidenta del Congreso, Presidente del Senado, Presidente del Consejo General del Poder Judicial, Vicepresidenta, ministros, ministras, embajadores, señoras y señores, buenos días, bienvenidos a la celebración del 40 aniversario de la entrada de España en la OTAN en el Teatro Real. Muchas gracias por su presencia en este acto conmemorativo de la adhesión a la Alianza Atlántica, un día como hoy, 30 de mayo de 1982. Comenzamos con la interpretación de la obertura Leonora número 3 de Beethoven. Mr. Lord Robertson, Mr. Willy Klaas, Mr. Javier Solana, Mr. Anders Fogh Rasmussen. Good morning. Today we're very proud to be celebrating the anniversary of Spain's entry into NATO. 40 years have passed since the historic protocol formalizing this membership was signed. Modern Spain is explained by its determination to position itself within the European institutional architecture. Its democratic transition culminated with entry into NATO and the European Union. Belonging to the Atlantic Alliance has helped consolidate Spain as a committed ally in political, strategic, and operational matters, and as a partner loyal to the principles of cohesion and solidarity amongst the 30 member countries. During this time, Spain has changed profoundly, and with its entry into NATO, it joined a group of allied countries with which it shares values, principles, and interests. For this reason, multilateralism is a key plank in our approach. As the Spanish generals underline, wherever there is a NATO flag waving, there is a Spanish soldier. Our country has come a long way from the first mission within NATO in 1992 up to the recently announced deployment in Lithuania. This will mark the second time Spain hosts a NATO summit. The first was in 1997, while Mr. Javier Solana was Secretary General, and now we're proud to be hosting a summit at such a crucial historic moment for our democracies, a transcendent summit, as the President Sanchez just mentioned. And today we have managed to bring together some of the main protagonists of these last 4 years in NATO to hear about your experiences in office as former Secretary Generals. So please, Mr. Willy Klaas, in office from 1994 to 1995. I would like to hear you about your reflection of this anniversary. You want to start, Mr. Solana?
Sure.
I will prefer, Mr. Klaas, to follow the chronological order.
Okay. Now, thank you very much. Your Majesty, it's a great pleasure to be here celebrating this anniversary. The Secretary General of NATO has mentioned that Spain had already another summit in 1997. In that summit, 3 very important decisions were taken. The first, as has been said by him, the enlargement for the first time of the alliance. The second, that we should not forget, is that we created in that summit the Council NATO-Russia. And the third thing that we created was the NATO-Ukraine Council. So we had an idea at that time of how things could evolve. Unfortunately, those councils were going down in interest along the time, and we couldn't finish the fundamental ideas that were taken in Madrid. Now, if I were to talk to you very frankly, as I should, I think that at this point in time, the most important thing that the people which are gathered here it would be to ask clearly and logically for a ceasefire immediately in the region. Russia has failed. Russia wanted to take the capital, Kiev, then get rid of the government, and then appoint a government that will avoid President Putin. That has not taken place. Therefore, I think that this is the moment, when Russia has not been able to get his objective, to have try seriously to have a ceasefire. And for that, all of us, all the countries represented here, have to make an effort because we should be able to do it. I remember a few days ago when I hear that the Secretary of Defense of the United States, in the first conversation that had with the Secretary of Defense from the Russian Federation, was we need to construct a ceasefire. I would like very much to avoid, to really sum up my voice to that conversation of the two Secretaries of State from Russia and from the United States. That would allow the people of Ukraine to recuperate their lives, to look forward for a while at least, and to really the political side of Ukraine also to get together and turn into what we can be the exit at the end of this ceasefire. But for me, the ceasefire is a must, and whatever we can do, we should do it.
Please feel free to continue.
Okay. First of all, congratulations, Spain. Congratulations, NATO. During my mandate as Prime Minister of Denmark and Secretary General of NATO, I worked closely with three presidents of the Spanish government, Aznar, Zapatero, Rajoy, and I appreciate very much your unwavering support and your commitment to NATO missions. During my tenure as Secretary General of NATO, we conducted 6 operations on 3 continents. We adopted a new strategic concept. We developed a new approach, smart defense, to get more value for our defense money. We prepared a readiness action plan to strengthen our territorial defense in the East, and we decided that all allies will live up to the 2% target before 2025. And under current security circumstances, that is more necessary than ever. We made NATO fitter, faster, more flexible. That's exactly what we need now. Russia's unprovoked attack on Ukraine has taught us that we cannot take freedom and democracy for granted. We will have to fight for it. And the Ukrainians have the will to fight. We must give them the means to fight. Heavy weapons, and we must stop the financing of Putin's war by a complete stop to import of Russian oil and gas. If the Russians stop fighting, we will have peace. If the Ukrainians stop fighting, we will have no Ukraine. So the Ukrainians are fighting on behalf of all of us. That's why I say, with the Ukrainians, Slava Ukraini.
Majesty, Mr. Secretary General, 2 or 3 considerations. First of all, the regime in Moscow we are facing today can be compared with the darkest period of the Stalinist period. So the situation is dangerous and even unpredictable. So, conclusion has to be, it is our duty to reinforce NATO capabilities and to enlarge Finland, Sweden, even if this is not, in my opinion, to say it as the French are doing, a petit cadeau. Adding 1,300 kilometers of frontiers in Finland with Russia, Mr. Secretary General, you will face some military and strategic problems in doing so. But it is your duty, and you have to support this. Second consideration, I have a feeling that this conflict will provoke a fundamental geostrategical change in the world. We cannot exclude the risk of a new structure in which authoritarian states are confronted with the democracies. Let us look very attentively what Beijing is doing in trying to enlarge the little coalition of the BRICS. It can be the start of an adversary structure towards the West. So once again, our answer has to be a reinforcement of NATO. Last consideration, of course, we have to do all what is possible to help our Ukrainian friends. And I think it's time to reinforce the weaponry Ukraine is asking for. And I know there are some doubts because one cannot negate the military capabilities of Russia. My last consideration, ladies and gentlemen, I think that we are underestimating the evolution of modern weapons in which modern technologies have been integrated. So humanity is facing serious risks. So nevertheless, we are obliged to support the Ukrainians. We have to find a point of contact in which we will discuss the control of weaponry and, in a second step, the disarmament. I think it is inevitable on the moment that we are supposed making big efforts in order to save our climate. But let's not forget the risks we are facing with the combination of weaponry and modern technology. So, thank you.
Your Majesty, Prime Minister, thank you kindly for the invitation to come here and celebrate 40 years of Spain within NATO. When I came to NATO in 1999, I followed a Spaniard as the Secretary General. The most visible demonstration of Spain's incorporation into this alliance. I recall the ratification procedure in the British Parliament. I was a very new and young member of Parliament when we endorsed the membership of Spain in NATO. And for those of us who had some memories of the dark days of dictatorship in Spain, that was an amazing feeling to have. And then to come to NATO and to follow Javier Solana in the position of Secretary General was quite a move forward for me. I was also able to appoint a Spaniard to the first senior military position when I appointed General Ortego to be the commander of the Kosovo force, the commander of KFOR. I don't know whether the general is in the audience here tonight, but he was a superb representative of his country. So here we are celebrating 40 years of Spain's membership of NATO at a time when we are now welcoming 2 new applicant members for NATO in the vanguard of the Madrid summit. I have to say that I spent 4 years trying to persuade Finland and Sweden to join NATO, and Vladimir Putin managed it in 4 weeks. And they will enrich the alliance tremendously, this alliance of free nations covering 1 billion people, like-thinking people in the world today. And never was there a greater challenge to the NATO alliance than we face at the moment. The unprovoked attack by Russia on Ukraine is something that has changed geopolitics fundamentally and perhaps forever. And as somebody who got to know Vladimir Putin in his earliest days, who signed with him the Rome Declaration in 2002, his signature on the Rome Declaration endorsed the principle that every country had the right to make its own decision about its own security, a commitment like so many others that he's broken, from the United Nations Charter through the Budapest Memorandum, the NATO-Russia Founding Act. He's broken the one that he himself signed that day. And I don't think it is for us, any of us in NATO today, to decide at what point the Ukrainians will stop fighting. Our obligation is to ensure that the Ukrainians have the ability to fight against the aggression that is taking place in their country today. And that is why I endorse the views that have been expressed of giving the Ukrainians the means to fight, the heavy weapons, the training of their troops that is so desperately needed at the moment in order to counter the onslaught of the Russian forces. And let them decide at what point they stop the fighting and start the discussions with anybody else in the world today. Our great alliance of 30 countries, and soon to be 32 countries, is facing perhaps its biggest test, and yet with an absolute resolution that we stand for freedom, for liberty, and the right for countries to make their own choice today. So as we celebrate 40 years of this great country being part of the alliance, let us ensure that in the future we can guarantee for the people of Ukraine the same rights that we celebrate protecting here today.
You all agree that this moment is crucial, transcendental, historic, and dangerous also. I know it's hard to do predictions, but based on your experience, how do you think it will evolve? In the short term, at least.
I think the biggest risk is a prolonged conflict. And we have to make sure that Putin does not get a success in Ukraine, because he won't stop. If he gets success in Ukraine, next victim might be Moldova, then Georgia, and eventually he will also put pressure on the 3 Baltic states. We have to make sure that Putin does not succeed in Ukraine. And if Russian troops do not leave Ukraine, then we will get into difficulties in rebuilding Ukraine. Because as long as Russian troops in Ukraine, you will still have war, because the Ukrainians will not surrender. That's why actually we have to kick out the Russians from Ukraine to get peace, a lasting peace, and to engage in a comprehensive rebuilding of a new Ukraine. And that's actually what gives me hope, that we have a chance to rebuild Ukraine, not only buildings, infrastructure, etc., but also politically, to get rid of corruption and the oligarch system, to build a new, solid, free democracy. That would be ultimate success.
I think that for the European citizens that may be worried and some scared maybe about the possibility of having in Europe an extended war that goes beyond the present war, I think we have to tell them that if that were the case, it will not be, NATO is there to defend us, because the members of the European Union today, most of them, all of them, are members without Austria, the only one, but once Sweden and Finland enter, the whole of the European Union will be part of NATO. And therefore it will be a defense for whatever happens by NATO to the European citizen. So the European citizen may be, if I may say, I'm going to say relaxed, but thinking that they will have be defended by Europeans and by NATO. But I think that the European Union people are concerned not only about the possibility of an attack on their homes, but are concerned about the consequences of the war in their own lives. And if you think, for instance, that the level of prices of oil, of gas, are going up, tracing to levels that we didn't expect as a cause of the war, it's important that the war is ended as soon as possible in order to give the prices of oil come back to the reality that it should be today. The second thing that I'm concerned about is the consequences of the war outside the European Union. And I'm not thinking on the rich countries of the world, but I do know very well at this point in time the level of hunger in many countries of the world is increasing. Poverty is increasing in the world, and it's increasing because Ukraine and Russia exported around 30% of the food that is eaten in the world. And today, it's not being exported. So the sooner we can get that food, which is in the soil of Ukraine, the better for the rest of the citizens of the world. So I think that the second claim that I will do for today is to guarantee, to ask the two sides, in particular the Russians, that they allowed the export through the sea with Ukraine that doesn't have any port at this point in time, Odessa. and the possibility of getting that food, which is there, to be transported to the countries in which that is needed. That will be another sign, important sign of what is NATO about. We are concerned about war, we are concerned about those who are fighting, but we are concerned also of the consequences that may have in the rest of the world. And therefore is the most vulnerable of the world, people which are suffering now from the hunger. And I think this should be another preoccupation when we gather in this type of meetings, another preoccupation to think about. And I would like very much make a statement on that, in that sense.
I fully agree with the comment given by our Danish colleague. So we cannot permit Putin to obtain a victory, because he will not stop there. He will have following steps. So indeed, we have to increase our military efforts for the moment. I know what I've said in my first conclusion, it is in paradox with what I'm saying now, but indeed we have to stop Putin. Afterwards, maybe we can be inspired by the conclusions of the so-called Normandy group. That means that the eastern provinces of Ukraine will be Ukrainian territory, but giving some autonomy and respect for the Russian language, because there is a problem. Let's be clear. Second idea, I know we are speaking NATO, but let me say one word about European Union. We cannot go on with the rule of unanimity concerning foreign policy and even fiscality and so on. We have to change fundamentally this, so what the European Union is urgently needing is the deepening of the structure and the disappearance of this stupid rule of unanimity, even in the dialogue with Washington. Because I'm not so convinced that the short-term objective of Washington is the same as the Europeans are developing. So what we need on that point is a common foreign policy in Europe, and that needs the disappearance of the unanimity rule, which is a very serious handicap for all those who have been a member of the European Council of Ministers. So that you know all the difficulties we have met there. That's my second conclusion. What we need much more than ever is a Europe speaking with one voice and acting as one person. That's a necessity.
I'm not going to follow that to its logical conclusion, because foreign ministers today are meeting in Brussels trying to seek unanimity on an oil embargo. And let us hope that they arrive at unanimity, because the pressure on Russia needs to be more considerable than it is today. Of course, we are all paying the price for Russia's aggression. The rise in inflation, the effect on food production, supply chain disruption, all of this has had a dramatic effect. And we have an obligation as politicians, or even those of us who are yesterday's men, to get over the message that that price is worth paying. Because the Ukrainians are not just fighting for themselves, they're fighting for a principle, and that is the right of self-determination and the right of people to live without the threat of being invaded and crushed by a neighbouring country. So there is that obligation to do much more to get the message over. The second thing is that we need also to offer to the decent people of Russia a prospect that after this episode in their lives, there is a role for Russia in the world still to play. The majority of the Russian population are being denied any information about this war, denied even the right to call it what it is, a war. And when the scales have dropped from their eyes and they realize the brutality and the horror of what Russian troops are inflicting upon their fellow Slavs in the neighboring country, then they will realize just what Vladimir Putin has brought to them. So offering them a prospect for Russia in the future is something we need to get across. During the Cold War, we used every mechanism possible to get a message through the Iron Curtain at that time. And eventually people realized beyond the Iron Curtain that there was a better life out there, and these countries are now inside the alliance, inside the European Union. So we need to get that message across to the Russians, that what is happening in their name is unacceptable and something that the world is simply not going to tolerate. In the meantime, a very heavy price is going to be paid for all of us while we continue to give them the moral, financial, and military support that will be necessary for them to win this conflict.
Before concluding, the nations of Europe, the European citizens, are living this situation with great concern and are wondering how peace and security can be guaranteed. What message of hope can you transmit to the citizens of the Alliance?
Well, the hope that we can express and hope that it will be accepted by the majority of the people is that the world today is very complicated, that we are seeing even the beginning of deglobalization. We may have even the possibility, the drama of having a world decoupled, and those things will be very dramatic, I think, economically, politically. So we have to recreate, to see how we recreate step by step some of the things that we have lost. I may be a classic, or I may be an old-fashioned thinker, but I do think that foreign policy should be based on having all the channels of communication always open. That is what we did, that was what I did, and I'm afraid this is not what is being done today.
Yeah, on a very tragic backdrop, I also see some light at the end of the tunnel. One thing is that Putin has managed to create a stronger NATO, stronger unity among Europeans, stronger unity across the Atlantic. The transatlantic alliance, in the broad sense of word, has been strengthened. NATO will soon be joined by Finland and Sweden. And actually, I'm very happy about that development against a very tragic backdrop. And as I indicated previously, I also think it gives us a chance to actually rebuild a new Ukraine. I've met a lot of young Ukrainians, and they are talented, well-educated people. They are longing for a new future without corruption, without all the oligarchs to dominate the public life in Ukraine. And it gives me hope that once this war is over, and one day it will be over, once it's over, then we can start rebuilding really from scratch a new Ukraine. And finally, it also gives me hope that I think not only the young generation, but several generations now have learned a lesson from history, that appeasement with dictators does not lead to peace, but to war and conflict. I think we can get rid of the naivety that has dominated our relationship, not least with Mr. Putin. I've met Putin a lot of times, and I have learned the lesson. He only respects one language, the language of force, strength, unity. And that's also what gives me hope. Once this war is over, I hope that we can develop a new, more sustainable relationship between the West and Russia. We need that.
Maybe that I'm going to make some remarks which are less sympathetic, but what is the attitude in the world today towards the sanctions? Of course, China is not playing with us. That's not a surprise. But do we understand clearly what India is doing? Increasing the energy commerce with Russia factor 4. Indonesia, president of the G20, is not implementing sanctions, on the contrary. South America, let's be clear, Mexico, Argentina, even Brazil is not very enthusiastic about the sanctions we have taken. South Africa, Southern Africa is not playing with us. In the assembly of the UN, where there was a vote about the sanctions, 17 member states of the UN of Africa didn't vote with us, 17. Can we have a discussion on the attitude of the Arab countries, and especially Saudi Arabia? The situation is very complicated, and as I've said, at this moment, unpredictable. Nevertheless, we have to maintain more than ever the solidarity both sides of the Atlantic Ocean, the United States, Canada, and Europe. A united Europe, I insist, a united Europe, speaking with one voice. And once we have established peace in Ukraine, and I understand what you say and fully agree, we have to do together all what is possible to rebuild that country. We have to think clearly how to develop the new geostrategical links in the world. And it is a very complicated challenge. For the moment, as me concerning, unpredictable and very dangerous. But having said that, first things first, let's take the measures necessary to help our Ukrainian friends in order to stop Putin. If we take the risk to give him some victory, he will continue. That's clear. So we have to stop him. That's clear. Thank you.
I strongly agree with that, and Vladimir Putin has succeeded in several ways that he never intended. He's brought a new determination and unity among European nations. He's bound the United States to Europe in a way that he thought he could break. and he's persuaded 2 new nations to apply for membership of NATO. That is a signal failure in the objectives that he set out. He's also managed to remind our populations of just how important national security, national resilience is, and how important the NATO alliance is as well. Because the NATO alliance is not, as we know, simply a military alliance. It's a political organism which has over the years achieved much. I've got a very vivid memory of my time in NATO, not just in declaring Article 5 for the first time, but with Javier Solana intervening in what was going to be a civil war in what was then called the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. And at the end of that year, when Javier had created a peace agreement, the Ohrid Agreement, and NATO had disarmed the insurgents at the time, we went down to the Tetovo Valley and were greeted by large numbers of children there who wouldn't have known the difference between NATO and the EU or Aldi or Tesco, but who knew that something big had happened and something had arrived. And these young children in mixed villages there would today be refugees if that war had not been stopped by a combination of a military alliance and a diplomatic superpower at that time. And it's remained in my mind. And last year I went back for the 20th anniversary of the Ohrid Agreement and met some of the people, the insurgents of the time, and was introduced to them by the now Minister of Interior of North Macedonia. And it's a huge pleasure to have the permanent representative of North Macedonia here today. So we've reminded people, and Vladimir Putin has reminded people of the importance of the organization and how vital it is to all of our safety and security. So all of us ancient representatives of the Secretary General class wish the current incumbent of the job all our best wishes and good luck for the year that he's got ahead of him. This is maybe the best time not to be Secretary General of NATO. But we wish you all the very best, because as Willie Claes has said, we live in a very complicated world where the geostrategic kaleidoscope has been shattered, and we don't know where the pieces will land. And you and the members of the North Atlantic Council will have huge responsibilities in the year that is coming to ensure that safety and security is guaranteed in the way that 40 years of NATO have done so for Spain.
If I may add, let's follow clearly what's going on in Bosnia, where Putin is playing a strange role in Serbia, and one cannot exclude that we are going to new conflicts in Bosnia, provoked by Serbia, which signed a new agreement with Putin last week for 3 following years. So the situation, even in the Balkans, is still preoccupying.
We have some new problems, but some of the old ones are still with us.
We have to leave the discussion here. It was really very interesting, very exciting, inspiring to listen to you, and I thank you all for participating. Thank you so much.
Grazie, guarda,